Sequestarians. Today is chapter 9 of My Life with the Spirits. Hope you're all doing well. Good morning. Today we're on chapter 9, The Wizard of Takilma. On June 5th, 1968, after winning the California presidential primary election, Robert F. Kennedy was shot to death in the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The consensus around the hippie campfires was that the evil forces of proverbial military-industrial complex were firmly in charge of the domestic situation. Fearing things would get worse for those with dissident philosophies, many of our neighbors made plans to go even deeper into the woods. Carl and Elsa liked what they had seen at the Sunny Valley commune and soon moved there with their children and some of the cats. A month or so after we saw their smiling faces on the cover of Life magazine. The photo spread on the inside featured Carl and Elsa as well. Today, you can find those same pictures in numerous coffee table pictorials of the 1960s. The DuQuettes were not so anxious to submit to the hard work and disciplined lifestyle of formal communal life. We pooled our money and bought half an acre of land by the Illinois River near Takilma. Mark and Margaret pitched a tent on the property and set up the home base for our house building efforts. Constance and I moved nearby in a magical little one-room cabin behind the massive renovated barn that was the home of the Wizard of Takilma Road. Gary Dubois didn't look much like a wizard. He was a quiet man, about 5.5 feet tall and almost skinny. He had a thick black beard that he kept well trimmed. He smiled all the time and spoke with a charming French-Canadian accent. He lived with his wife, Diane, a huge woman, easily 3 times his size, and their 10-year-old son, Andre. Their home was the envy of everyone on Takilma Road. From the outside, it was a huge barn, complete with all the exterior adornments one usually expects to see on an old barn: hubcaps, horseshoes, and an assortment of deer antlers and animal pelts. The centerpiece was the skin of a large brown bear, complete with head and claws. The interior was bizarre, to say the least. It was one big room, partitioned here and there by antique bookcases, bureaus, secretaries, and wardrobes. 2 walls were taken completely up, floor to roof, there was no ceiling, with makeshift bookcases crammed full of books. Gary admitted to having over 3,000, but there could have easily have been twice that number. In the southeast corner near the front door, Diane had her kitchen, illuminated on 2 walls by large, cheery windows. It could have served as a cozy model for a Beatrix Potter story. Her altar was a huge, light green enameled wood stove and warming oven upon which she invoked the most amazing delicacies that she crammed in your mouth each time you entered her world. Gary worked all night at a local dairy and during the day performed the usual chores around the farmstead. I'm not sure when he slept. Our little cabin was close enough to the Dubois barn for us to hear Gary and Diane fighting at night. Actually, it was just Diane that did the fighting. Once she started yelling at Gary about one thing or another, he would escape by astrally projecting to safety. He was only successful if he could get to the couch and pop out before Diane saw what was going on. She described herself as being cursed with clairvoyance. One night, Constance and I were awakened by the sound of dishes smashing against the barn wall. "You're not going to float out of here while I'm talking to you." The voice was Diane's. She meant business. Another plate crashed into the wall. "Get back, goddammit, or I'll move your little ass body where you'll never find it." We heard Gary's pitiful mumblings, and then another dish hit the wall. Okay, stop it. I'm back now." Early the next morning, Diane came to our cabin with a plate of cheese blintzes and an explanation of the previous night's events. "He does this just to irritate me. I can see him do it. I wish he couldn't. If he gets too far away, he can stay out for hours. But if I catch him just as he's leaving, I can bring the little fart back. Last night I nailed him with a soup bowl. Bam! Right through the skinny little spook." Gary was a pranic healer. And I've got a footnote on the word pranic. The ancient Hindus postulated the existence of prana, the vital life force which permeates air, water, sunlight, and all living things. They further theorized that a yogi can, by mastering certain techniques of breath control, pranayama, increase this vital force in his or her own body and transmit its healing energy to others. So Gary was a pranic healer, a skill that made him somewhat of a folk hero in Southern Oregon. People from as far away as Grants Pass and Medford traveled to the barn to receive his treatments. Constance and I were privileged to watch him at work on a number of occasions, including asthma attacks and broken bones. However, the most amazing thing I ever saw him do was resurrect a dead cat. Like most of our neighbors, the Dubois were slaves to a menagerie of barnyard animals. Diane's favorites were a pair of toy poodles named Shushu and Misty. Constance and I were very impressed by the character and intelligence of these critters, and when Misty had her next litter, sired by the neighbor's dog Tootie Poo, we were the first in line for a pup. And I've got a footnote here, a personal footnote. That pup, this little sweetie, we named Shep, and he remained our faithful companion until his death 14 years later. Diane also raised Siamese cats, who, it seemed, found a way to breed with every feline in Southern Oregon. Predictably, the yard was alive with kittens that were just too cute for words. One warm summer evening, I accidentally stepped on one and crushed the poor thing to death. I was wearing my heavy work boots. It didn't have a chance. I was hurrying to the barn, probably to see what Diane was cooking, and came down full force on the tiny fur ball. I heard it crunch with several sickening cracks that told me it was mortally injured. I dropped to my knees to see its last pitiful struggles. I had obviously broken its spine. Its back legs were completely motionless, and just for a moment it waved its front paws in the air. It was so little. The last breath inflated its wee body like a tiny balloon, and then exited through the bloody mouth and nose, creating shiny red bubbles that quivered for an instant before popping in the warm evening breeze. I was so upset that I couldn't think straight. I even considered going back to our cabin and not telling anyone what happened. Diane is going to kill me, I thought. I decided that I'd have to face the music sooner or later. After all, how can you lie to a psychic? I picked up the little carcass. It fit easily in the palm of my hand. The black eyes were wide open and its mouth agape. I knocked at the door. Diane opened it and immediately saw everything. "Oh, you big oaf. Oaf. Oh, you big oaf. Bring it in, bring it in." She snatched her dead kitten from the scruff of its neck and held it up to show Gary. Its crooked body swung from her hand like a wet rag. "Look what Sleeping Bear did stomping around the barnyard in the dark." Diane gave everybody Indian names, usually to ridicule physical abnormalities or character flaws. I was dubbed Sleeping Bear because of my girth and laziness. She named Constance Smiling Squirrel because, well, have you ever seen a picture of Constance? "Look what Sleeping Bear did stomping around the barnyard in the dark." I babbled a score of groveling apologies. Gary was seated on the couch in a full lotus posture, smiling from ear to ear, wearing nothing but black Speedos. Bring it here," he said with a twinkle in his eye that I mistook for a tear. "Gary, I'm sorry. It's dead. I broke its back. I crunched it with my full weight. I'm really sorry." "We'll see," he said. Diane put the kitten in his hand. Oh God, I thought, he's going to try to bring it back to life. "It might be the wrong time." Gary giggled as he began to work. He held the kitten in the palm of his hand and used his right hand to trace rings and spheres in the air around the body. His gestures and movements were intensely graceful, and as I watched him, I could almost see colored lines of energy radiating from his palms and fingertips, wrapping the little kitten in what looked like a vibrating ball of twine. After 10 minutes or so of making spherical motions, he held his hand over various parts of the kitten's body and took a series of deep breaths that he held for an impressively long time. Alternately, he emptied his lungs and held his negative breath for equally long periods. The whole atmosphere in the room became charged. My own hands and fingers tingled as I watched Gary work. Diane sat in the kitchen with her eyes closed. I was very impressed by what was obviously a psychic tour de force, but it still didn't alter the fact that the kitten was dead, really dead. And all those heroics were not going to change that. I was more than a little embarrassed for Gary. He was trying so hard to be the neighborhood holy man. This was the first time I had ever seen him fail at a spiritual chore. I felt extra guilty about the whole thing. He began to violently stroke the air on 4 sides of the kitten, creating, as it were, a pyramidal field. With each stroke, he raised his left hand almost as if he were going to toss the kitten in the air. If it were alive, I thought, it would surely be getting a thrill out of that. All these rough movements jostled the little body back and forth, giving the appearance of animation. I watched Gary for nearly a half an hour and was anxious to go home and put this sad evening behind me. I looked over at Diane, hoping to get some encouragement to leave, but her eyes were still tightly shut. Gary began the entire cycle of techniques over again. First the sphere, then the breathing, then the tossing. He repeated this cycle, this time faster, then again and again, until finally his left hand dropped to his lap, and I heard what sounded like a kitten's cough. Gary wiped a plug of brown blood from his naked leg. The kitten rolled back and forth in Gary's hand and coughed again. He turned his tiny patient on its back and began to work on its underbelly. Immediately, more brown liquid came out of its mouth. I moved closer to see. It was alive. There was no doubt about it. It was alive. "You're right," Gary giggled. They were the first words he had spoken since beginning the treatment. "You broke his spine." "Big oaf," Diane chimed in without opening her eyes. Gary went to work on the back. Using the thumb and forefinger of his right hand, he rolled and twisted the air like he was rolling an invisible cigarette. He started between the kitten's ears and moved slowly down the tip of its tail. He reminded me of a child playing doctor on a pretend patient, but it was more than pretending. As I watched his fingers move, I could clearly see what he was visualizing. I looked over at Diane, her eyes still closed, but I knew she too shared the vision. Gary was braiding the spine in his imagination, and Diane and I were helping. For a few golden moments, I saw how everything in the universe is alive and connected to everything else. Everything is alive, and nothing is impossible if you can visualize it perfectly enough. Within a few minutes, the kitten's back legs were thrashing wildly, and Gary was having difficulty keeping the little critter in his hand. Before I went home, I watched the dead kitten sit up on the coffee table, scratch its ear with its hind leg, and yawn. In the morning, it was out in the barnyard wrestling with its brothers and sisters. Diane named it Lazarus. Later that week, Gary accidentally backed over Lazarus with his pickup truck. I watched him dig its shallow grave behind the chicken coop. "I guess now is the right time," he giggled. And that's the end of chapter 9. I'll be here tomorrow with chapter 10, Rock and Roll Rosicrucian. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. Have a good day.